In my last video, I concluded that long-distance Amtrak lines, or lines that are 750 miles or longer, should exist. However, I acknowledge that these long-distance lines are undoubtedly flawed. The biggest flaw is that they frequently encounter delays. The reason most delays exist to begin with is because of freight train interferences. So, in order to decrease delays, we really need to deal with these freight train interferences. And that's what we'll talk about in today's video. These interferences are technically illegal. This illegality is outlined in the Amtrak Improvement Act of 1973, where it says, and I quote, "Except in an emergency, intercity passenger trains operated by or on behalf of the corporation shall be accorded preference over freight trains in the use of any given line of track, junction, or crossing, unless the Secretary has issued an order to the contrary in accordance with paragraph 2 of this subsection. Any railroad whose rights with regard to freight train operation are affected by paragraph 1 of this subsection may file an application with the Secretary requesting appropriate relief. If, after hearing under Section 553 of Title V of the United States Code, the Secretary finds that adherence to such paragraph will materially lessen the quality of freight service provided to shippers, the Secretary shall issue an order fixing rights of trains on such terms and conditions as are just and reasonable." End quote. The issue here, though, is that this is a law that is almost never enforced. So the most immediate, actionable solution to the delay issue is simply a litigious United States government. One stereotype of Americans that exists abroad is that we like to sue over just about everything. So why not fit that stereotype by having the United States government sue freight rail companies like crazy for the delays that they cause to Amtrak passengers? What makes this an attractive remedy is that you don't need to pass a single law in a Congress that is oft dysfunctional, or fund a single dollar to Amtrak in a political environment that might not be the most favorable towards Amtrak. This is something that the government can do with the current tools available to them. A more aggressive approach that I floated in my own brain would be to amend the Amtrak Improvement Act of 1973 so that Amtrak can sue freight rail companies directly, rather than having to go through the layer of the federal government. This could improve enforcement of the law. After all, Amtrak clearly cares about this issue, as they've made quite the public ruckus over the years about freight rail interferences. Given this fact, I could see Amtrak being all too happy to litigate in order to bring about better service for their customers. Or at least more willing to litigate this issue than the federal government has. An even more aggressive approach yet would be for Amtrak to not have to deal with freight rail companies anymore, and just build its own tracks. That would require the building of tens of thousands of miles of trackage, something Congress would need to give a lot of monetary resources for, and something I'm not sure Congress would give the monetary resources for. And that's before you get to all the land Amtrak would have to buy. And you could easily end up with situations where property owners just outright refuse to sell their land to Amtrak. That is a real possibility. But on the flip side, if Amtrak doesn't have to deal with freight tracks anymore because they mostly run on their own tracks, then problem solved. Another benefit is that you can build infrastructure conducive to electrification, which comes with a couple of benefits. First, trains that run on electric power emit less carbon dioxide than diesel trains, thus maximizing the environmental benefits of taking the train. And second, trains that run on electric power accelerate more quickly and are often able to go faster than their diesel counterparts, thus meaning that Amtrak trains would be able to go more quickly, in addition to being more reliable. While I am a huge fan of this approach, and even tried to will it into existence in videos where I dream of Amtrak lines that should exist, I'm not sure how likely this is to happen, given how expensive this would be. It would require a commitment to passenger rail similar to the commitment this country showed to highways in the 1950s. And I'm not sure that commitment is quite there. Though, I wish it were there. A fourth approach I've heard floated around is for the United States to nationalize all the rail tracks. This is not unprecedented, for it happened during World War I. While the intent is good, and while parts of me feel sympathetic to this approach, the chances of this happening are low in my opinion, for the simple reason that I could see such a proposal being derided as socialist. After all, it seems like many calls for greater government involvement in anything is derided as socialist, and therefore not something that should be done, even if it is proven that the private sector is incapable of running a particular industry effectively. I therefore think that, as far as ambitious policies are concerned, Amtrak building its own tracks is much more likely to be palatable politically than nationalizing rail trackage. Before giving my final thoughts on the four approaches I suggest, I want to ask people to smash the like button and subscribe to my channel for more content on imagining better rail transit in the United States. Anyway, back to the video. If I could choose, and not have to worry about any political or monetary considerations, I would focus on enforcing current laws on freight rail interferences as a short-term solution. And as a long-term solution, I would focus on Amtrak having the resources to build as much of its own tracks as possible. Because the goal ultimately would be for Amtrak to run predominantly on its own tracks, my hope is that the law about passenger rail priority would just become obsolete in most cases, because Amtrak wouldn't be running on that much freight trackage anymore. Is that wishful thinking? Almost certainly. Am I manifesting the good vibes that would come with Amtrak having control over the tracks it runs on? Absolutely. But in the long run, we have to aim for the goal of Amtrak running as many services on its own tracks as possible. If that were to happen, Amtrak could then run its services when it wants, however much it wants. Plus, in a society where wealth is often tied to land ownership, having Amtrak own significantly more land puts them in a much better position to be financially stable. And also, building Amtrak infrastructure, where you have electrification, would provide great benefits to both the environment and train speeds. Amtrak could really benefit from having its own tracks to run on, in more ways than one. If you have any thoughts on my ideas in making Amtrak more punctual, please leave a comment in the comment section below. Thank you, and have a good day.